Let's talk about emotional priming. So what is emotional priming? Essentially, it is getting yourself ready to show up to conflict or conversation, to show up to anything in a positive mindset or in a mindset that is flexible. So I use the analogy for couples. Emotional priming is like cooking pasta. So when couples come in, before conflict or during it, they're imagine like stiff, uncooked pasta. And so what emotional priming is doing is boiling the pasta, essentially. It is helping couples feel more relaxed, more forgiving, more patient. It's helping partners become more malleable. And so it's really important. It is preventative. We do it at the beginning of session. It is a tool for helping couples pivot when they're in conflict. And it's something that we do even at the end of sessions to just kind of debrief and decompress. And so there are specific ways that we want to emotionally prime to be most effective in conflict with our partners. The good news about emotional priming is that only one partner has to be able to do it at a time. So again, I go back to choice-based behavior because emotional priming is all about those pivotal moments in conflict where you get to choose how to respond. You can prime yourself to respond in a way that you know is going to be effective, and I'm going to tell you how. So there are 3 priming techniques that are, I think, easy to remember because they all start with P. So there is the pause, finding the pain point, and the pivot. So our first technique, the pause, exactly what it sounds like. You are pausing. You are taking a beat or 3 to regain your composure, whatever that looks like for you. That can look like a quick meditation. It can look like breath work. It can be a prayer that you say in your head or a mantra. Whatever you need to do to kind of realign, to show up in a way that you want to show up with your partner. So the pause can happen when you notice that the emotional ego is coming out, whether it's your partner's emotional ego, it's yours. It's that moment where you recognize we're about to fall over the edge here. We're getting into that pattern, that dynamic of conflict that we get into. And so stopping to take a few deep breaths, stopping to verbalize that you need to take a pause, even stopping to separate yourself. But of course, this has to work for both you and your partner. We don't want you to just walk out of the room or avoid conflict altogether, but communicating that, hey, we're about to spiral into this thing that we do, this conflict dynamic. Let's pause for a second. That's all that it is. So the next technique is finding the pain point. And this is what I call thinking like a therapist. So it is finding the so what of your argument. What is your partner most upset by? Easily enough, you can just ask your partner that. You can start by asking, I'm not grasping what you're most upset by right now. Can you tell me what about this that we're fighting about, whatever it is, what are you most upset about? And your partner might tell you, and it's your job to try to validate that, and even more effective, to follow that with another simple question, which is, what do you need me to do? So if you can be in the mindset, if you have primed yourself to be patient, loving, forgiving, it's going to be easier for you to find those simple questions and say, what is hurting you most right now? What's most upsetting you? And what can I do to help? What do you need from me? So that's finding the pain point. I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say you end up in a disagreement that's about doing the dishes, and your partner says something like, you're never listening to me. I have asked you repeatedly to help me with the dishes every night, and they're stacked up. I'm always the one that's doing everything around here. And so you recognize, you maybe take a pause instead of reacting with defensiveness, saying, yes, I do. I help you all the time. I just did it 2 minutes ago, or whatever it was, right? We don't want to do that, because defensiveness pushes your partner away. It says, I don't hear what you're saying, and I don't agree with you, and I'm doing everything right. That's what defensiveness does. So it pushes you apart. So you take that pause, that beat, and ask your partner, what about this situation is most upsetting you? And your partner might say, well, I want you to do the dishes. I'm upset because I asked you to and you didn't. Okay, I hear that you're upset because I'm not helping you with the dishes. So what can I do? What do you need me to do? And your partner might say something like, we agreed that we were going to help each other with this, and really I just feel like you're not listening to me, and I'm alone. I have to do everything alone. And so your partner's going to give you these clues. They're going to give you answers. The issue isn't truly the dishes. In a way it is. Your partner wants that help, and they very specifically asked for it. But your partner is telling you, I feel alone. I feel unheard. I feel like you're not listening to me. And so in that pain point, we're getting to the bottom. We're getting to the emotional underpinnings of conflict. We're getting to the crux of what it's all about, that your partner feels alone and misunderstood or unheard, right? And that's what it's really about. So when you respond in defensiveness and say, I did the dishes last night, that doesn't really help. It's not effective. It's, again, I use the visual of it's pushing you apart. Finding the pain point is a very effective way to move through conflict. So getting into the last emotional priming technique, the pivot, this is our 180. This is moving us into recovery from conflict. When we pivot in conflict, we are, again, moving toward recovery. And there are a few ways to do this. I'm explaining techniques, but you don't have to use these. You can come up with your own. It can be very personal for what works for you and your partner. One that I have found is very effective and works well, couples seem to like it, is choosing a safe word. So something that jars the two of you out of this fighting stance, right? It can be a phrase, or it can be just a single word. You can say music, and that's your safe word. That's your timeout, saying, hang on, we're tumbling into, the hole in our roof. We're tumbling into conflict. We know how this ends. We want to try something different. And so that safe word is that signal to you and your partner. You can, at that point, decide, do you need to separate and de-escalate? Do you need to just sit and talk? Do you need physical touch? Do you need a hug? Whatever you need, insert it here. This is your place to shake it up and try something different, a pivot, literally. So in addition to finding a safe word, there is something that I call a quick mend, meaning something that is a recovery tool that can quickly pull you out of your fighting stance. It's the opposite of a fighting stance. It's a loving stance. So again, these can be personal to you. They should be personal to you. But a quick mend can look something like using humor, making a joke, an inside joke. Again, has to work for you, because sometimes using humor it might upset one partner when the other partner is making light, right? But using humor, using physical touch, so just pausing to hug, or a hand on the knee, or even an apology. An apology is a really effective pivot tool. Just saying, I'm sorry. We don't want to do this. I know we both don't want to fight. So let's just take a minute and come back to this later. These are quick mends. They're just ways to shake you out of the normal pattern, break up the status quo. And this moves us into recovery. And the number one thing that I will say about recovery is that it is all about talking about what went well maybe in your conversation or in your conflict and what needs improvement. Because we all have a natural pattern after being in conflict where I think for the most part, a lot of us want to connect again because conflict feels like a threat to your relationship. It pulls couples apart, and after a conflict, you want to rejoin, get reconnected. You want to feel safe. You want to make sure that there isn't a threat to your relationship, and so we want to connect. But before we do that, before we get back into the honeymoon phase that frequently happens after we've been in conflict, we want to make sure that we're talking about what happened. Chiefly to recognize patterns so that we know, hey, this is what happened to us. When you said this word, when you brought up my mom, I just flipped. That's a trigger for me. And so this can be a place where you learn from each other and you tell each other, this is exactly what I need. This is exactly how you pushed my buttons. And these things are off limits in fights. Please don't mention my mom or don't use the word jerk, right? So you can talk about ways that you can improve moving forward so that you aren't repeating the same mistakes over and over in your conflicts. So with moving through conflict, with emotional priming, and with recovery, it takes a bit of behavior rehearsal. It might feel unnatural at first, and that's okay. It's because we are training ourselves to respond in ways that maybe aren't natural right now. But the more we practice these techniques, the more they're going to feel like us. I always recommend focusing on one thing, and focus on one thing that you want to improve in your relationship, maybe one emotional priming technique or one technique like active listening or validation, and focus on that. Focus on that for a week. I think that helps reduce any potential overwhelm when you're receiving a lot of information about how to do this. Just pick one thing that kind of jumps out at you and go from there.